to speak on role of armed forces in post-conflict scenario, lessons for Sri Lanka, Professor Alan Hatcher. Professor Alan had a unique military career in that he served in both the British Army and as commissioned officer in the Royal Air Force for 30 years. He has nearly 40 years experience in the counter-terrorist field as both an operator and a planner, and uses the knowledge gained during this time to educate and train others in the requirements of operators in the front line fight against terrorism and crime. Professor Allen is recognized as being the first person to found a private academic institution for the training of personnel involved in counterterrorism activities known as the International Schools for Security and Explosives Education. I welcome Professor Allen.
Prior to any of my lectures, I like to make sure that the audience is awake. And also, I have a saying, which is, we as armed forces and counter-terror specialists should always be prepared and expect the unexpected. Didn't expect that. Oh, do I see it again? I've lost my presentation. Now, see, I didn't expect that. There we go. I'm very old and I'm almost computer illiterate. Defence Secretary Rajapaksa, Vice Chancellor Melinda, distinguished guests, officers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and thank you very much for inviting me to talk at such a prestigious symposium. I'm very honoured to be here. I'm also very honoured to have been treated to half a bottle of Iraq last night with General Melinda, which I owe him for. Fortunately, I'm speaking now, not at 8 o'clock this morning. Post-conflict scenarios are very heavily dependent on the strategy correct from the very beginning. From a global perspective, I'm always worried when I'm in organisations like this that I'm being set up for something. From a global perspective, there's been a number of numerous instances of conflicts that have never been truly resolved, leading to many generations living in fear. Examples that we've heard this morning: Bosnia, Kosovo, Northern Ireland, Iraq, now Afghanistan. I've been very fortunate, or unfortunate, to have served in every one of those theatres. I can assure you, I didn't start the trouble, I just happened to be there. For any real lasting peace, it is imperative that we get a total buy-in from everybody that's involved. So from the Tiger side, we need to make sure, and we've heard this morning, we need to make sure that we hit the financial side, the political supporters, those supporters that are based in London, the West, America, etc. In my opinion, total peace has only ever been achieved through diplomacy and communications. Regardless of military victories, we have to bring diplomacy and communications into it. It's important that both sides have a voice and that the victors are magnanimous in victory. Otherwise, there's a very real danger of marginalising those groups who will eventually return to violent means in an effort to have their opinions heard. I'll come up with a small cycle, which you know what those academics are like. We like to have things like this flashing up behind us. To achieve a total form of peace, you need political will, the will of the people, and commitment on both sides. You need strong military and political leadership, and from everything I've heard and seen, you've definitely got that in this country. And you need achievable goals in all aspects of the peace process. An example of the process from my own experiences in Northern Ireland, and during my research, it was interesting to see the similarities between the way the IRA operated and the way that the Tamil Tigers operated. The organisations were very similar. The difference was the IRA was only about 200, 300 strong. You actually faced an enemy that was thousands strong. The use of English force in controlling Ireland has been prevalent for more than 300 years. We've tried to control the country. In 1969, the British Armed Forces were deployed to Northern Ireland to protect the Catholic minority, who were coming under attack from the Protestant majority. This was very quickly reversed when the IRA started to represent the Catholic minority and used their major bombing and assassination campaign to try and force a change in the political system. And another point that Professor Peris brought out this morning is the fact that we, as British citizens, actually funded social housing and social benefits for the IRA. They were actually living in council homes, and we were paying them to be there. So we had lots of lessons to learn. Inevitably, the meetings took place between gentlemen like this, Mr. Ian Paisley on the right, Reverend Ian Paisley, and Martin McGuinness on the left. I have to tell you, this is one of the few times where I have actually had a man in my sights. I've actually taken the shot and missed him. Otherwise, Mr. McGuinness would never have been there. I actually took a shot at him in 1978. Missed, and got several extra duties for doing it. Under the Good Friday Agreement, Prime Minister Blair agreed to release hundreds of political prisoners, some of whom had committed acts of terror, including murder, some of whom have actually gone back to their old ways and who are actually putting bombings back out there. They're shooting again, getting into organised crime. So we're almost returning back to it again. The problems in Northern Ireland do persist. We've had more bombings just recently, more shootings, but they do tend to be individuals and not a coherent terrorist activity. During conflict, we as armed forces have a very clear duty. It's very easy. We get the enemy. Soldiers who are normally peaceful, law-abiding citizens can become very cruel and barbaric. How does it happen? Some individuals perhaps have psychopathic tendencies. They say because we're in the military, we all have psychopathic tendencies. I don't know what they're talking about, personally. Many social and psychological studies have provided some but not all answers to these questions. And I have to tell you now, Dr. Mal Hetirachi, who is one of the finest clinical psychologists in the world, not just Sri Lanka. I mean, she is outstanding in the work that lady has done. And as you all know, she is Sri Lankan. Wonderful, wonderful lady. Many social and psychological studies provided, but they don't provide all the answers to these questions. Regardless of how why it happens, the result is often rapid and oftentimes occurred escalation of conflict. So we end up into this cycle of more conflict. All armed forces personnel, all of us, are trained to fight. And it can be sometimes difficult to switch the switch in your heads from being the aggressive fighters that the government wants us to be, to then becoming peacekeepers, to becoming the guys who walk down the streets and become peacekeepers, diplomats and negotiators. Something we did not join the military to do, we're not trained for, and a lot of people don't comprehend the reason for it. I found it very difficult becoming a peacekeeper in Bosnia, Kosovo, even Northern Ireland, from what my base strengths were, which actually was to get out there and kill people. That was my job. At the end of the day, that's what every one of you in uniform, that's your job, is to kill people. The British have been doing it for a very long time. That's why we're so good at it. However, I note, and I'm not going to make any comments about colonialism or colonies or things like that because I don't want to upset Mara. She is American and she finds it very difficult to understand English. Sorry. These are two slides, something we weren't trained for, which was, as bomb disposal operators, we were called in any time there was something suspicious. These were war graves. Well, war graves. These were hidden graves during the Bosnian conflict. And what had happened was that all the bodies had been booby-trapped. So effectively we had bodies that had been in the ground for 7 months, 8 months in muddy, wet ground that had grenades strapped to them, a little bit of PE, a few detonators, some very complicated switching mechanisms. I had 3 18-year-old soldiers with me who were bomb disposal. We had to put our hands inside people's bodies to actually get rid. So we understand what you guys have been going through. During times of conflict, we increase the numbers of our armed forces for obvious reasons, but during post-conflict, we have to reduce those numbers very quickly for political and financial reasons. It's a fact that in post-conflict times, most countries will need a period of time to regenerate economies, to start to rebuild society relationships and infrastructures, such as roads, buildings, hospitals, etc. The armed forces personnel are excellent at doing this. We have the discipline, we have the knowledge, we have the labour. It's a very cheap option for the government, as they have a fixed workforce at a fixed price. It also allows the soldiers to take pride in becoming, again, making significant contributions to the rebuilding of the country, not forgetting the contributions that they've already made. And remember, the public are very fickle. Whilst we are in this mode of victory, the public think we're wonderful. But in a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time, when they start to look at their tax returns and they see how much they're paying for you, all of a sudden they start to ask the question, what are they doing for me today? Well, no, remember what they did for us 3 years ago? They gave us our country back. Yeah, but that was 3 years ago. This is the problem. In the UK, we have the same problem. We actually started to sell off our warships in 1983. What happened in 1983? One of our greatest leaders, post-war leaders, Margaret Thatcher, decided that we were going to take the Falklands back. The problem was we couldn't get down there because we didn't have enough ships. The great thing was we used the Queen Elizabeth I and SS Uganda as cruise ships to go down there. It's the first time I've ever gone to war in such luxury. It was just living in the hole at the other end that was the problem. Transition to peace can be very complex and difficult due to the fact that humans are involved in the process. As soon as we bring humans into a process, it gets difficult. Many mistakes have been made in the past by conquering countries or organisations. The most recent obvious mistake was the one that we made in Iraq. The Americans and the Brits, and I'll just say the Americans and the Brits, we disbanded the military system. So effectively, we took out a complete structure of the Iraqi government, which, if we had utilised it, the way you guys have utilised the systems that you are aware of, we could have stopped an awful lot of problems happening. The generals, the leaders, the people who, once they'd lost the war, flipped. We should have maintained them. I believe here in Sri Lanka you've gone a long way to actually try and integrate the opposing forces for that, and I think you should be commended for those actions. During transition, there's always security concerns. These include the return to violence by the combatants who have no desire to return to society, or those who still think they have a battle to fight. There are also those who will use their military training and experience to foster a life of crime. Getting ahead of myself. If the Sri Lankan Armed Forces mission is complete with the defeat of the domestic terrorist threat, then we have to start thinking about a new strategic direction. And I've heard again several mentions of this morning. So what we have to do then is have a new strategy put together by the government, because obviously at some point the North is going to end. So what are we going to do with the armed forces? For those who have seen the film The White Christmas, we don't know what to do with generals when they retire. What do they do? I don't actually know what generals do when they're actually in the armed forces, but well, certainly not the British ones. Such a strategy, such as a new strategic direction, will need to be put in place by the government. And I think under the leadership of yourself, sir, I think that will be an outstanding strategy. Such a strategy could include taking a lead in international anti-piracy. Your location here, if you look at it from a strategic position, you are ideally located to take on the pirates and a lot of the maritime piracy that's going on from all the way on the other coast around Somalia all the way across to the Malacca Straits. You've got the navy, you've got the discipline, you've got the ability, you've already proved you've done that. What a contribution you could make to international peacekeeping in terms of the anti-piracy. Global disasters, disaster management. These are all the